not going to cover the background to sustain because I already did that in the webinar, and I'm assuming that the people who are in the webinar, most people on this call are already in the webinar, but if there are any secrets there or anything people weren't involved in that first session, I believe that we have that recorded, and if necessary, Becky can circulate that, the link to that, so that you guys can catch up on any of the broader background to the program. So just some quick points about the call then, and some key dates. So again, I'll probably assume that most of you have had a look at this page and the detail behind the call. But if you haven't, then you can find it at this web address. And again, we'll circulate these slides after the meeting to all attendees, so don't worry about noting anything down. On there, you'll find all the information that you'll need about the call, the approach, the timelines, which I've sort of put down here in the slide as well. And also some of the information that supports that, which I'll be presenting now, just to give people a wider idea of what we're doing. So call was launched back the 15th of May. We did the webinar on the 19th. Obviously, we're talking today and trying to try our best to do a virtual sandpit. I realise that might be a near impossible task, but I'd just like to acknowledge the support of the KTN in helping us to try and put forward a digital platform that allows people to explore and develop their research ideas. We'll see how it goes. Closing date for applications is the 13th of July. And in the interim, I think after this meeting, Becky will be circulating some times on the dates below, where I'll make myself available for any sort of follow-up queries after this. I guess out of the proposal document itself, the most important elements are going to be the assessment criteria. So pay careful attention, sort of in order of preference, to suitability. So how does it address the requirements and the scope for the call that's set out, and also a lot of the background information that we would have on potential areas of interest to the industry coming from some of the workshops which we've run, which I'll run through in a second. Obviously, the research quality, this is a novelty. This is an EPSRC funded program, so it has to be sat in the right sort of fundamental research area. The relevance to the manufacturing capability. Is there a suitable level of challenge and that almost impossible task of balancing challenge and against risk of delivering the program with relatively modest sums? And then also, you know, what potential does it have to deliver something or a wider, more detailed program in the future, and how well is it planned? So, you know, important things to focus on, because these are going to be the things that the panel will have to focus on in assessing your proposals. So I mentioned this briefly in my introduction to the previous in the webinar, was at the Sustain Engagement event. So I just wanted to go through that in a little bit more detail, and what I've done is I've just, for simplicity and also because it's a document that you guys have access to, I've just downloaded the Sustain Engagement event document that you guys would have access to on our website. So that's at this address here. And I've just pulled out a few things where I know that there's some complementarity to existing previous programs or programs that may have already been conducted elsewhere. And also those areas where I know that there's almost no activity within Sustain, and there'll be high degrees of complementarity. When I went through and did this the first time, I was using red, amber and green, and then I stopped doing that because I just want to stress that the point of this is not to say what's in scope and not what's out of scope, but just to provide a little bit more context on what's already being done and where there definitely are gaps. So there were 2 workshop sessions that were run in sort of 2 one-hour blocks, as I remember. So there was one for each grand challenge. So our first grand challenge is carbon neutral iron and steel making. And the focus of those workshops were on materials resource efficiency and energy. And the guys working on that pulled together a whole load of posters, and then we condensed that into some workshop output. So this is a sort of the high level that I presented in the last in the webinar. So there's we boiled these areas or the responses down into 3 broad areas: so disruptive technology, energy and materials. When we come to do the interactive elements of this sandpit, you'll notice that we've specifically chosen people to help develop ideas in these broad areas. But within that, then there was a subset of different things and ideas and potential opportunities that came out of that. They're sort of on the slide here. And again, obviously this will be circulated, but it is also available on the website. But I just wanted to pick out a few things where I know that there's some activity already aligned to this within Sustain. So looking at alternative chemical ion reduction, there is some work already looking at planned within Sustain to look at, say, hydrogen reduction of directly reduced iron. The scrap supply chain and distribution challenges. So there is a task 3 looking specifically at what we do with the incoming levels of impurities and how we manage those. But also some work within task 4 of Sustain. Again, you can review this either through the webinar presentation or online on the website. There is some work within task 4 of Sustain looking at some of the supply chain aspects as well, and if necessary we can put you in contact with those project leads so that you understand the scope of those things in more detail if you think this is going to have an impact on your proposal. Within the energy, there's some work on heat conversion rather than heat recovery, I'd say. So there is some work around thermoelectrics, now we integrate those into high temperature linings. And alternative carbon sources, primarily in terms of how we feed those into the primary processes. At the moment, we're looking at blast furnaces, but that might extend to the EAF as well, so looking at societal waste streams. And again, I'll circulate these, but basically as a color code, the amber ones are ones where I know that there's some activity, and the blue ones are the ones where I know there's almost no activity within Sustain, and real strong opportunities for complementarity. So there's already some work within task 2 looking at how we burn different societal waste streams, I think I've already mentioned, and some work on the effective tramp elements within task 3. Similarly, the removal of residuals from those materials or how we manage that within task 2 and 3. So on the metal side, looking at how we record traceability in task 4, there's some work on that, looking around how we can identify opportunities for blockchain, for example. For disruptive technologies, there's some work already planned to look at the effect of hydrogen reduction for directly reduced iron. There's some work going on between both tasks 4 and 5, looking at the opportunities to use digital twins to improve the process. And the ones down here, which perhaps of interest, so there's some work within task 1 looking at CCU particularly, rather than storage. In fact, we don't really focus on storage at all, and so that is, I have highlighted that as a potential gap. Although we recognise that there are other big schemes like IDRIC, for example, that are going to be looking at storage and will focus more on storage. And then there was quite a lot down here on metal powders, and we have to recognise that there is another manufacturing research hub, MAP, run out of Sheffield by Ian Todd, that is specifically focused on powders, and I think we would not ignore that, but look to collaborate with MAP where possible for challenges specifically on powder. In energy and gas, there was a large body of work that was done on looking at top gas recycling and introducing new reducing gases into the blast furnace. That's called the ULCOS program. If you Google that, it's an old FP6 European program. If you Google that, you'll find lots of information on that, so it'd be worth looking at if that's something of interest. And the work around the water gas shift is probably higher TRL and doesn't really fit the fundamental research remit. Heat collection recovery, I think I've already mentioned, there's some work on thermoelectrics in task 6. And there's been quite a lot of work, again within ULCOS, on what happens if you introduce hydrogen into the blast furnace, so worth looking at that for prior art. On low demand processes, I think there's already quite a lot of work, and you need to look to the United States if that's of interest on smaller scale processes and renewables. Hydrogen fed to DRI again falls under task 7. There are some other elements I think in here that are interesting. One thing that came out that was interesting was the idea on functional steels, of looking at the production of high quality electrical steels. This is a very important and interesting project for the future of the UK economy, but I just want you to bear in mind that we're looking at cross-sectoral impact. So if we're going to look at one particular product form or one particular product for one particular sector, then that might end up being quite narrow and not have the cross-sectoral impact that we're looking for across the whole of the steel industry. So something to consider. For Grand Challenge Research Area 2, interestingly, the stuff that came out of those workshops was much less much less overlap in the existing program. And there was a lot of focus on how we use new business models, some of the wider challenges beyond the technical challenges, how we track materials through the supply. And that's probably one of the only areas where there's a little bit of work planned within Sustain to look at how we track materials through the supply chain, but it's not very mature, and I think there are still some opportunities to build on that. So much more opportunity for complementarity, I think, within some of the Grand Challenge Area 2, based on the information that's here, not the ideas that you may come up with on your own, which may be, of course, different to these. So again, on this side, I think the only thing to look for is the product tracking. So that's an area that we do have some coverage on, and we can, again, provide some more information on that if that's something that's going to be of particular interest to you. But there are a lot of much wider issues, I think, which we're not addressing currently within Sustain, which really would add value, specifically around sort of societal change and how you change people's perception of how they use the materials, the opportunities for remanufacture, what implications that might have for forming, how we could persuade people to use a remanufactured material, so design codes and those sorts of things, and also potentially quite a lot of work on lifing as we look to reuse a material numerous times, perhaps beyond what it might have initially been designed for. So how do we understand how the material might degrade and how the material's properties might change as a function of time? And then from this second Grand Challenge workshop, there were some sort of potential opportunities and barriers identified, which is summarized here in the bottom right. And I think the one thing to sort of summarize from this is that the steel companies, there is a potential for them to move down the supply chain. I think if we're looking at opportunities for the steel companies to move up the supply chain, sort of more towards the raw materials producers, and I think that's something which Sustain is already looking at to a degree, but certainly the opportunities for companies to look down the supply chain and get further down the supply chain, I think there's still a lot of opportunities for research which can guide that strategy, or at least help understand the value proposition of that strategy. So I think that should provide sort of a sort of an overview of and a little bit more flesh on the bone potentially of some of the outputs that we had from the workshops and the things that helped to define the scope of this call. If there are any further questions on this, while the meeting mojo is happening, I'll be sat here with the team in this meeting if you want to dip back into it to discuss that in more detail, or ask any more questions about any one of those points in more detail, and I'll try to answer those as best as I can.
The way this is going to go is we're going to have two sort of, we're going to have multiple meeting rooms. There's a chance for the bookable one-to-ones with the industrial experts that are up on the screen now. So each of these effectively are experts in the particular area, have a lot of knowledge, and have a lot of knowledge about the application and the technical side, and and it'd be really good to talk to them and not only get some feedback on your ideas, but also get some buy-in from them, because these proposals will be much stronger if you have the backing of the industrial side as well. And we've also got the facilities. So as part of Sustain, we have a pot of funds for accessing equipment and analysis equipment, measurement equipment that's part of Warwick Manufacturing Group, the Royce Centre in Sheffield, the Materials Processing Institute up in Teesside, and in Swansea itself. So we have a selection of people who know all about the kit that's there and can advise you on whether or not it's applicable, or how it would be used, and the system for that. So as this is going on, we'll have the main Zoom meeting will be open, and Cam and the team will be there to answer any questions there. We do have the facility to split off into one-to-one rooms, so if anybody wants to, or multiple sort of private rooms. So if anybody wants to have a chat in private, we can set that up quite easily. So if you let Cam or Sarah or Becky or Joe know about that, then we'll set that up. And then we've also got the Meeting Mojo meetings in parallel, where we have the one-to-one meetings. and they are starting right now. So it's probably best if we sort of close down the introduction now and actually go to the meetings. So I don't know if anybody has any quick questions. If you do, raise a hand. If not, we will go straight into the meetings.